Hi, and welcome back to Misty Mountain Gaming. I'm the D&D Wannabe. My name is Rob. And Dungeons & Dragons has a lot of confusing words, acronyms, and phrases, doesn't it? It's almost its own language. Sure, once you're fluent, it's pretty easy to understand, but to an outsider, the words that we use can be daunting, confusing, or just kind of sound silly. For example, when I'm playing D&D, I'm usually running the game as the DM. I like to run in my own homebrew setting, a place of my own design. I love to create BBEGs to throw against the PCs, whether it's a one-shot or a campaign. I usually try to make them pretty tough, with a high HP and a high AC and a high DC on all of their spells, so that maybe the players fail a few saving throws. The monsters in the MM just don't do it for me anymore, so I usually tinker with the ability scores in their stat blocks. Critting on a natural 19, giving them a bonus D6 or D8 to their damage, or an extra attack each round, will help make them a lot scarier. But I don't want to make a creature too strong. I don't want to have a TPK on my hands. See? Now, probably most of you watching this video understood a lot of that. Maybe even all of it. Or at least were able to pick up on some context clues to kind of get the gist. But you probably also know someone who would have no idea what I was talking about. If so, send that friend or family member this way so that they can benefit from what we're about to go over. Or maybe you're one of those people and sought out this video on your own, in which case, this video is for you. We're about to, alphabetically, cover some of the most common or confusing phrases and acronyms that you might encounter when interacting with a Dungeons & Dragons player, either out on the internet or in real life, to help you understand what in the nine hells we're talking about. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it should be good enough to get you started. And if I mention something in one of my definitions that you don't understand yet, don't worry, I'll get to it. So, are you ready? Let's begin. Ability check. Rolling a D20 modified by an ability score modifier. Ability scores. The numbers that determine a creature's aptitude regarding certain mental or physical characteristics. Specifically, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. AC. Armor class. A value that represents how difficult it is to hit a creature. It's usually a number calculated by combining the protection provided by any armor or shields that you're wearing, plus your ability to dodge and defend yourself. Attack roll. Rolling a d20 when trying to strike a target with an attack or spell. Contested by the target's armor class. BBEG, or Big Bad Evil Guy. An acronym referring to the ultimate villain of a campaign or one-shot. Campaign, a series of consecutive sessions that build upon one another to tell a story. Character, a creature in the fiction of the game that has a personality. While it could refer to an NPC controlled by the Dungeon Master, it usually refers to a PC controlled by a player. Check. A role that determines success or failure in a particular endeavor. CP, SP, EP, GP, and PP. Let's all be adults here. Copper pieces, silver pieces, electrum pieces, gold pieces, and platinum pieces, respectively. They are values of currency, and while particular countries and kingdoms in a D&D setting may have different coinage, a piece is a standard measurement that represents the trade value of that particular material. Creature. Any living, or undead entity in the fiction of the game. Crit, critting, critical hit, or critical success. This means that when you make an attack roll, you have rolled a value that means that you will do double damage to your target. Though it is usually synonymous with just rolling a 20 on a d20. As opposed to the critical fail, or critical failure, which means that on an attack roll, you automatically miss the target, and is usually synonymous with rolling a 1 on a d20. d4, d6, d8, d10, d12, d20, or d100. This is a die, or dice, where X is the potential number of outcomes, and X is the number that follows the D in every circumstance, usually corresponding to the number of faces on that die. D&D, or D&D. Dungeons and Dragons, the game we're talking about. A tabletop role-playing game where several players and a dungeon master cooperate using their imaginations, dice, and some basic math to tell a story. DC, difficulty class. The target number which must be met or exceeded when attempting a check or a saving throw. DM, Dungeon Master. Me. The person at the table responsible for arbitrating the rules and driving the story of the game forward, spearheading the game of Dungeons and Dragons. DMG, Dungeon Master's Guide, a book designed to help dungeon masters create, fill, and manage a game of Dungeons and Dragons. Dump stat, a character's lowest ability score, or the one that they care the least about. Encounter, a dangerous or delicate situation that represents a potential turning point in the story, usually synonymous with combat in the game, but not necessarily. Feats, special talents and abilities that characters can unlock as they progress in the game. It is a common, though technically optional, rule. GM, or Game Master. Functionally the same as Dungeon Master, but it's a system generic term. Whereas D&D has Dungeon Masters, Call of Cthulhu has Keepers, and Vampire the Masquerade has Storytellers. All people who fill that role in a game are collectively and generically Game Masters. Homebrew, content created for the game by an unofficial source, typically by the person running the game, but not necessarily. House rule, similar to Homebrew, but rather than being about the contents of the game, being about the rules of the game. An unofficial rule that is unique to the group that is playing. HP, hit points, a value that represents how far a creature is from dying, similar to in a video game. Initiative, commonly used to refer to the beginning of a combat encounter, or to the modifier that you would add to a d20 roll to determine your place in the initiative order, or to refer to your place in the initiative order at all. Initiative order, the order in which creatures take their turn in an encounter. Metagame, or metagaming, allowing decisions in the game to be affected by knowledge possessed by the players playing the game, not the fictional characters they're portraying. Though it's almost exclusively used with a negative connotation, I promise not all metagaming is bad. But that's another video. Modifier, the number added to or subtracted from a roll. Monster. Despite its ominous moniker, it's really just used to refer to any antagonist in D&D. MM, or Monster Manual. Kinda like it sounds, a book containing lots of monsters for Dungeons and Dragons. Natural The numbers shown on a die before adding or subtracting the relevant modifiers, usually referring to the results of a d20, such as a natural 1 or a natural 19. NPC, non-player character, is about what it sounds like. Any character that the Dungeon Master is responsible for role-playing. One-shot, or one-off, a game of Dungeons & Dragons whose story is designed to begin and be resolved in a single session. Party, a group of PCs. PC, player character, also self-explanatory. A character that one of the players is responsible for role-playing. Traditionally, each player has one PC, and there are only as many PCs as there are players at the table. I'll pause here to say that you may also run across the acronym DMPC, or Dungeon Master Player Character. This antithetical term is used to refer to a character portrayed by the Dungeon Master as though they were a player in the party, usually with a well-deserved negative connotation. PHB, or Player's Handbook. This is a book needed by both players and dungeon masters and contains all the information needed to create a character for a game of D&D, as well as the bulk of the rules necessary to run a session. Player, anyone playing Dungeons & Dragons that isn't the Dungeon Master. Proficiency, denotes comfortability or familiarity with a particular action or item. Proficiency Bonus, a number added to a d20 roll to indicate proficiency in a particular check, saving throw, or attack roll. Roleplaying, or RP, the act of determining the actions of a fictitious character and describing those actions. Round, the amount of time it takes for all creatures in the initiative order to take their turns, typically described as 5 or 6 seconds. RPG, or role-playing game, a game like D&D, where the mechanics of the game are based upon and depend upon roleplay. Running the game, performing the function of a dungeon master or game master. Saving throw, a d20 roll used when trying to avoid falling victim to a negative effect, such as a trap or spell. Setting, the fictional world where all of the events of a campaign or session of Dungeons & Dragons take place. Session, a single occasion of Dungeons & Dragons play, sometimes synonymous with episode, as streaming games of Dungeons & Dragons have become more common. Skill check, an ability check that is modified by a relevant skills proficiency bonus, if any. Stats, a creature's modifiers, skills, attacks, and defenses, sometimes used synonymously with ability scores, as older editions of the game use this term to refer to them. Stat block, a collection of stats for an NPC or monster in D&D. To hit, or to hit modifier, the value added to an attack roll, or the combined total of this value and the associated roll. TTRPG, tabletop role-playing game, a role-playing game traditionally played by a group of people all seated around the same table, though a lot of us do it online these days. TPK, total party kill, when all of the player characters are simultaneously dead. If you're out there on the internet and encounter any of these acronyms, they are the abbreviated titles of other published materials by Wizards of the Coast. Though these abbreviations are not normally said, you may see them written and referred to on Reddit, on your favorite Discord server, or on Twitter by these acronyms. Pause the video here if you need a closer look. That's it, guys. That's the D&D Glossary video. Verbiage around this hobby is much like language itself, always growing, changing, and evolving. So this list is certainly incomplete. With that in mind, I'm going to be creating a living Google document and transcribing everything from the video there. I'll leave a link to it in the description below, and if you think of anything that I might have left out, be sure to include it in the comments below. We'll get it added, and if you have enough suggestions, maybe I'll have to remake this video. And hey, don't forget, I'm on Twitch now. I go live twice a week for games, for adventure writing, and for good old-fashioned conversation. Be sure to go to Misty Mountain Streaming and give me a follow so you don't miss anything. Also, subscribe here on YouTube and ring that bell so that you get an alert next time a new video is here on the channel. Until next time, friends and adventurers, farewell and Godspeed. Hi, and welcome back